So we moved to Guatemala, took a sabbatical, and shockingly, the hardest part of all of this was actually our navigating that co-founder relationship and the transition from a friendship, which was many years long. We were incredibly close with each other's families, but we never made these intense shared decisions together. The most important shared decision we really had to make was like where to go for dinner.
Yeah.
And figuring out how to translate our relationship from friendship into the business world.
Welcome to Manage Chaos Podcast, where we give you the startup business rundown in less time than it takes for you to get to work. Today, I am joined by the amazing Annie Garofalo, a Stanford MBA, Harvard BA, and leading expert in founder relationships and co-founder conflict, supporting 100 plus seed through Series A teams over the last 5 years. She has built a research and advisory firm called Confidante, fusing entrepreneurship, organizational behavior, and relationship therapy. Annie's going to be with us for a 4-episode arc that I am super thrilled to dive into. We were introduced in a very fun way. So I met Jackie at New York Tech Week because I was highly impressed at how well she walked in stiletto heels on cobblestones, and we immediately struck up a conversation because how can you not? And about a few weeks later, she emailed me and said, I have this person you have to meet. And I think it was just, she automatically connected us.
Yeah, I have no idea. I think it was how we talk about the startup journey. She just was like, she also said to me, I have someone you must meet.
It was like, you have to. Like, you cannot say no, right? And the first time we met for, I guess, breakfast, a drink, whatever, in Park Slope of all places. And we got attacked by bees.
We did.
But we had the best conversation.
It was so fun. Like immediately clicked.
So definitely shout out to Jackie, thanking her.
Truly.
Because this was definitely a match that needed to happen. The universe was conspiring in all the right ways. So Annie, this is our first time filming in person, which is very exciting.
Wow, I'm honored.
I think it's great that we're filming episodes about relationships in person.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think one of the topics that I want to dive into a little bit is how all this remote work affects interpersonal relationships. But we'll save that. But we're going to start at the beginning. So let's say if we have a day 1 founder or a year 5 founder, right? We're going to try and get into those crucial conversations that define the partnership. So let's start off with like the honeymoon phase. And I know you have a good story for this one, but why is being best friends a risk when you're starting a company?
Yes, it is a great starting point, and also the starting point of kind of my career journey into studying co-founder relationships. Maybe I can start with my story and then share what I learned from it and kind of how I've worked that into some of the client work that I do. So I started in entrepreneurship. I was in management consulting early in my career, working with Fortune 50 executive teams and watching all the dysfunctions that unfold there. And I overconfidently thought if I started my own company, we wouldn't have any of this dysfunction. So I grabbed my best friend of 20 years. Literally, we'd met on the bus to kindergarten. And this was post-college, and we loved to craft. So we decided, let's build an e-commerce ethical fashion platform. Let's move to Guatemala for 3 months because naturally that's easy. Do we speak Spanish? No. Had we ever started a company? No. But we said, why not? It seems like a fun thing to do. Let's try it out and share other cultures with the world and really have a positive impact. So we moved to Guatemala, took a sabbatical, and shockingly, the hardest part of all of this was actually our navigating that co-founder relationship and the transition from a friendship, which was many years long. We were incredibly close with each other's families, but we never made these intense shared decisions together. The most important shared decision we really had to make was like where to go for dinner.
Yeah.
And figuring out how to translate our relationship from friendship into the business world was something that we struggled with. We weren't the type of pair to have loud, aggressive fights. We were more of the avoidant type. We were like, oh, well, we don't want it to impact our friendship, so we just won't talk about it. And that over a few years built up and was really challenging and piqued my interest of if it's hard for us, it must be hard for other people. So that's what brought me to Stanford to study the co-founder relationship. And what I found was, while there wasn't much information on co-founder relationships specifically, except for this amazing book by Noam Wasserman, The Founder's Dilemmas. Couples therapy was a really important parallel that could be adapted to entrepreneurship. So the Gottman Institute is a leading research institute in couples therapy, and they have this framework called the Sound Relationship House. And the two weight-bearing walls of that house are trust and commitment. And best friends, family members, people with in-depth connections have a lot of that. But what they don't have is inside the house is how you operate, what your dynamic is. They only have that for their existing dynamic, whether that's friendship or parent, child, siblings. It takes a lot of open-mindedness and effort to rewire what that dynamic looks like in this different context. And that was something that the two of us didn't understand, and is kind of why I've now dedicated my career to helping people with that rewiring, whether it's on day 1 or year 5 or whatever the timing is.
So how do you think both of you having sort of more avoidant personalities played into that? What if one of you had been very sort of more confrontational?
I wouldn't say we have avoidant. I think I have a more, I guess, not aggressive personality, but that I would have been the one to bring it up. But because we had that friendship, it made me feel like there was more at risk.
Yeah.
Where actually it was probably the opposite. By not bringing it up, I was putting more at risk. I think one additional element to our dynamic was that I had studied business, and I'd studied neuroscience in undergrad, but my consulting work was in the business world, and her whole world was the fashion world. And so those two different backgrounds just gave us very different languages in the business world, which made it, again, easier to avoid those conversations because we had these differences of perspectives or differences of what it takes to build a company, what kind of expectations there are.
One of the other differences is whether the founder is getting into it for a lifestyle business
100%.
or they want a unicorn.
Yep.
Or even if they're building to keep it versus building to sell it.
Yep.
And sometimes those differences don't always get discussed early on. So what are some questions that you normally recommend folks to ask, or even of themselves? Because they might not know.
Yes.
When you first start, you might be saying, I just want to make money and get this thing off the ground. I don't know what I'm doing, 6 months from now.
Absolutely.
So how do you help them have those conversations?
Yeah. Well, so first off, I will say it all starts with self-awareness, exactly how you said. And that self-awareness is not a snapshot point in time. It's evolving and changing dynamically as your startup, your company, your personal life continues to grow and evolve. So there's a set of questions that I can name a few of that I think are important. And it's not just having that conversation once. It's revisiting it often and being okay with whatever the answers are and saying, this is a long-term relationship, we'll figure it out. Whether it's in the exact setup we have right now or we need to make some changes, we can make those. But it's having that kind of trust and commitment, going back to that Sound Relationship House, to make these questions and conversations most productive. But
and allowing it to evolve.
Yes, allowing it to evolve.
I think we get, and just coming from the operations background, people get so scared to put things in writing, or they get so scared to document anything because they feel like once they've done that, it can't change and it can't evolve. And I think as a society, we need to get better. Just because it's written down doesn't mean it can't evolve and change and grow as the people who are in it grow.
Yes.
And I think going back to your couples therapy example, that's how relationships and marriages survive, right? Because you grow and evolve. You get married in your 20s and then you're still married in your 60s, like my parents. They've completely changed.
Yes.
But they've known each other their whole lives. So it's each other's fault how they've changed, and they had to grow together. Do they drive each other crazy? Of course.
It would be odd not to.
It would be weird not to after that much time. But how can a co-founder relationship actually help people be more self-aware?
Fantastic question. I think the healthiest co-founder relationships are ones where the other person can act as a mirror for you. And I say this for a number of reasons, but for co-founders specifically, it's unlike any other employee-employee relationship. You're taking on incredible responsibility. You're taking on incredible burden, taking on a lot of risk. And there's very few people likely in your life that understand that journey and who you can be open with about your fears. So the people who understand that journey might be other startup founders or other investors, but you might not feel comfortable airing those concerns. So your co-founder holds this really unique role in your social support system, and not utilizing them for that and not being there to be that support for them can create a lot of challenges and isolation. So I think that's the most powerful role that co-founders can play for each other, is to not offer critiques for critique's sake, but say, I know these are your development areas, or I know you want to be a strong leader. Here's how I'm seeing you, and here's what you're incredible at, and here's some areas that you might want to consider developing. How can I help you in that? So it's not a punishment situation. It's not a boss, like it's not a hierarchical one. It's one of peers.
It is one of peers. And I think, going back to the relationship example, right, you both want each other to succeed because that means that you both together succeed. Yeah. And so taking any kind of criticism or feedback with that light and knowing that it's meant to help both of you go farther together, I think is important. So we talk a lot about on the podcast about companies doing values audits, understanding what their corporate values are, understanding what their mission, vision are. But as a person, you also need to do that. And as a co-founder pair, how do you do that in a way that doesn't place one person's values ahead of the other if they happen to be different? How are you able to leverage that once you create that audit?
Yeah, it's a great question. It brings me back to couples therapy research, where the Gottmans found that 70% of a couple's problems are what they call perpetual problems.
Ooh.
But that's okay. Like, they're not meant to be solved. They're meant to be managed through conversations and compromise and understanding that's the person you chose. And, that's what comes with all the other amazing parts of it. And that's true with co-founders as well. So while your values audit likely won't match up 100%, that 30% of those other areas where there is flexibility or there is alignment, those need to be your non-negotiables. Like the non-negotiables can't be in those 70% areas of difference. Right. It needs to be in those 30%. So the first step is knowing what for you and maybe your top values or your top goals or how you live your life. What do you need to be shared? And what are you okay with being different? And in what circumstances? So that's step one. And then step two is doing that comparison. And if those 30% are not aligned, then maybe it's not the right person or the right time, or maybe there's a different dynamic that you want rather than sharing that company or that ownership.
Yeah. So and I think a good way to sort of wrap this particular episode is, if you do that values alignment and you realize that you both really care about the idea, but maybe you want to come at it from completely different directions, or maybe you just are not aligned on sort of the how of the idea. How have you seen that play out in a positive way?
I think one of the best things you can do is realize early on it's not the right time or it's not the right person. And that there is no shame, there's no stigma around that. That's actually a success outcome. So I'll work with teams that come in and they're like, well, how many teams work with you and then stay together? I'm like, that's not how I measure success. I think if a team works with me and comes out realizing they're not the right fit, how can they amicably separate or figure out what ideal looks like for both people? And that they reach that conclusion together. No one feels forced out, and that you get to be like feeling joy in your work every day. Like, as a founder, you're taking on a huge risk. Remember that you have agency in determining your day-to-day. And if you're not happy in your current setup, you can change that, and your co-founder will want to support you in making that change. So I think there's a lot of ways that separation can happen in such a positive and important way. As long as you have the self-awareness to know that that's the right path.
I was going to say, it all, to me, comes back to the self-awareness.
100%.
And understanding that it's for the betterment of the mutual goal, and that neither one person is coming out on top, right? It has to be, what do they say, servant leadership.
Servant leadership. Yeah. And maybe a teaser for the next episode. But one phrase I love is, anytime something feels like me versus you, there's a reframe there for it's actually us versus the problem. And how do we collaborate in solving that? And the problem might be a lifestyle change, or it could be anything to that point of it's dynamic. But as long as you're coming on with that mindset of it's us together versus this problem, it's not me versus you can get to the right solutions.
Okay, I love that. I think that's the perfect way to end this episode. So this is the first episode in our 4-part series on co-founder relationships with Annie. You can find all the details about Annie in the show notes, and we will see you on the next episode of Managed Chaos Podcast.
Outsourcing your US tech talent shouldn't be hard. With Pobble.io, we deliver high-quality teams on demand and provide huge cost savings to your business. Try it now at Pobble.io. Mention the amazing guys at Managed Chaos when you email us and get a free market data report. Email contact@Pobble.io.